Dan John, thank you so much for joining me in Culture Chat today.
Well, thank you. Culture Chat. That's a nice name. That's a good name.
Yes,
Yeah.
I am so honored to have you on. I actually met you in 2010 at an RKC certification in Orlando. I don't expect you to remember because there was hundreds of people there.
That was
Uh,
it was insane.
it was. That was kind of a big one. There was like
The
all the
bus
major
trips and
players were there.
and the facility and the carrying everything in and out. Oh, it was rough. It was a rough. The humidity. Oh,
Yes, that's Florida for you. I know
yeah,
coming from where you're at, that's a little drier.
yeah,
Florida's no joke. But
yeah.
so there was kind of that evening before the kickoff event, before the certification, where everyone was supposed to be social and meet and greet. It was like this, the calm before the torture, basically. And for some reason, I went. My husband was the one certifying, not me. But I went with him for moral support, and he ended up talking to someone. So I started roaming around, and I was introduced to you. I don't know why or who I was next to, but I was introduced to you, and you said, "Hi, I'm Dan John. I'm kind of like a big deal."
I did not, did I?
I think that song had just come out, but I admittedly had no idea who you were.
Oh,
And then I
sorry.
told my
That was a
husband,
joke. Okay, that
I
was
know
a
it was
joke.
a joke. I totally know. And everyone who knows you totally knows that that was a joke. But you were like having a great time. You were so friendly and you were laughing. You were telling someone a story. And so when you said that, I told my husband, and he was like, "You were talking to Dan John?" I'm like, "Well, I wasn't talking to him. I just met him." He's like, he is a big deal."
That's funny because
Yes.
usually, as I do it as a joke, I think when we do those kinds of things, my friends make fun of me. So like Steve-O and Mike Brown and those guys, they're always like, they'll walk up and they'll shake my hand. And they'll say, "I'm Mike Brown. I'm a big deal." So it's just kind of a standard joke we use with each other to, just get a little bit of the thumb in the side of the.
Well, it was very well appreciated.
Yeah.
And I think people kind of appreciate that about you. If anyone who has ever read a blog, heard you speak, I think they all know you're very humble. And so I don't think you have to worry about anyone taking you seriously. But that is it made an impression, and I'll always remember that story. And so I thought it was fun. So with all
That's
of
funny.
that, I am very excited to have you on my podcast today.
Thank you.
And really grateful you're just taking the time to chat with me. I know how busy you are. So I know normally you discuss fitness because, you kind of like a big deal with
Uh-huh.
fitness, right? But
Right.
on this podcast, I've been fortunate to have a lot of other fitness coaches on and people that I respect. And I usually like go in a different direction. And my husband said, "Well, he kind of likes the sword and the stone, like a little bit."
It's my favorite part.
And
Yeah.
I understand you maybe read it once or twice. And I am by no means at the caliber of knowledge of Sword in the Stone as you are, but it was like one of my favorite from the Disney, cartoon growing up. I loved, the Wizards duel, like all of it. Like it was always like very impressionable. And I love everything to do with Merlin and, every TV series that comes out or movie. That's kind of my era. I'm like in the wrong era. I'm in the wrong period, right? So when I heard that, I'm like, awesome. That's what I want to talk to him about. Then he sends me your Wandering Weights, and I'm like, oh my, I'm not prepared for this. So I just re-listened. I listened to the audiobook like in this last few weeks, and
Sure.
I absolutely loved it. And so I am excited to talk to you about The Sword in the Stone.
Well, the first question is, which one are you going to talk about? So there's the 1938 version in Britain,
Mm-hmm.
and they have a radically different Robin Hood story.
Yes, Robin
And
Hood.
and then when it came to the United States in '39, the Putnam edition, they changed that story a little bit to have a griffin instead of the Andropithagori. And then there's the 1958 version, which gives us the sword and the stone. So I have this one here. I didn't know you were going to tell me this, but the edition I have, yeah, I got the 39 Putnam edition right here.
Okay.
And then, of course, this is what I use to keep my place.
Of course, naturally. That's
Okay, the
very
sword
appropriate.
and
The sword in the book.
yeah, there you go. So one of the hard things, like in the 58 version, you get the stories of the geese and the ants. Now that's actually when the book finally came out, and the Book of Merlin came out in 1975. I just graduated from high school, and I saw in the San Francisco Chronicle that Townsend had finally found this book and they'd re-released it. The Ants and the Geese story belong in the fifth book, which isn't in the ones in Future King. It's a separate book. White never published it. He never had a chance to go over it, but that's fine. But so the Ants and the Geese story get in the way, I think, of the Sword and the Stone story. They belong properly in the fifth version. Mm-hmm. And what they get rid of course, is by putting the Ants and the Geese in there, they got rid of the Madam Mim story, which you remember as the Wizard's Duel.
Yes, yes.
And then they also got rid of the snake, the dreams of the snake, and I think they got rid of the dreams of the trees.
Right.
So I think some of the best, most telling stories of the entire book were ripped out to make it fit into a 4-part series. And I have the original Once in Future King, the 58 edition, in my bedroom. It's next to my bed. So what do you want to talk about?
With all of that, my listeners are going, well, what?
Sorry,
No. I definitely, the one I did just reread or re-listen to was the Once in Future King T.H. White, with all of the snake dream, the story. Madam Mim is in it, and so I think they call it the unabridged version, right?
Probably the 39 edition, yeah.
So,
which is the one I recommend.
Yes, so that's good. So good news is I listened to the right one.
And they re-released that one later. Okay. So like the school editions, that's the edition they use for the schools, and the famous one illustrated by Dennis Nolan, that's the edition they used to, I think.
Okay. And so, let's get a little back history on not just the book, but with the book. So how old were you the first time you read it?
Well, I went to the Disney movie as a child. Now, as a child, we're a different world than what we have now. So it was a rare day when I was young. We didn't play sports. We didn't play what we called Army. We played Cowboys and Indians. We played Robin Hood and his merry men. We did Sword in the Stone, and we did Three Musketeers. Oh. I mean, so we were constantly. When Christmas would come out, and those big tubes that are inside of wrapping paper.
Of course, the cardboard.
That gave us swords for months, man.
Yes, yeah, until they bent in the middle, until the bend, and then
until you whacked somebody, and then they were no. So I watched the show as a child, and it's funny. It came out just right after John F. Kennedy was assassinated, and as an Irish Catholic, I can't, even though I was only 6. The death of John F. Kennedy is one of those things that in my life, it's the first time I saw literally every adult I know cry. And it was much more profound than people know. Right. We weren't ready for it as a culture. And of course, at the same time, we just had the Cuban Missile Crisis. Mm-hmm. And my brother was being sent to Vietnam at the same time, which we couldn't find on the map because our map said French Indochina. And so when the Sword and the Stone came out the next month, it's right after, JFK and his wife Jackie, they were called Camelot. In fact, the show Camelot had come out with, of course, Julie Andrews and Robert Goulet and Richard Burton. I mean, what a cast they had. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to put together the moment in time.
Absolutely.
So you've got Richard Burton, Julie Andrews, Robert Goulet doing a Broadway play. I mean, come on. Called Camelot. The Sword and the Stone comes out. JFK, this good-looking guy with his beautiful wife, and then boom, it's all over. And then the next month, The Sword and the Stone comes out, and it thuds a bit because the story isn't. They have 3 different voices for Wart Arthur. Mm-hmm. The story of the squirrel is a waste of time. The wolf is funny. But so that sits by itself, and I loved it. And then in 1970, I went to the Orange Public Library there in South San Francisco because I wanted to be a better football player. So I looked for a book on getting musclies,
right.
So I'd be bigger and stronger. And I found Miles Cowden's famous book, Bodybuilding and Self-Defense. And in fact, I later bought the book on eBay. It's in the house somewhere. In fact, I have book stacks.
I would imagine you have quite a library.
Yeah, that's just the one. That's just the one that sits next to me. Wow, that's just one of them. And then right there, can you see that?
Yes.
That's a whole other. So these are all mostly classics, and then down there, strength training books that I want to keep reread, and then there's classics too. So Miles Callum's book, and then I picked up a book on football called 7 Days to Sunday, which is funny. Elliot Asinoff's great book, because on Wednesday I found a football player named Kenny Avery, who was an undersized linebacker, and I was undersized. And so I did what he did to a T. And there's 3 words in there, and through the discus. And it's funny, those through the discus is going to be, those 3 words is going to radically change my entire life. And as I'm walking out, there's a book recommended by the librarians called The Sword and the Stone. And at the time, I was not a great reader. We were in the great books tradition. I guess I was a good reader, but I never read for fun. Well, so I come home from the library with those 3 books, and each one of those books radically changed my life. And the thing that I loved about The Sword and the Stone is that it is a tome. It is a canon of the love of education. Reread the book with the vision of education. It starts off that they're looking for a tutor. The guys are getting drunk.
Yes, they're having port wine.
Yeah, and funny because White is explaining what they're saying. It's hilarious. If you get a chance to read my back issues of Wandering Whites,
yes.
When I started going through this, I explain all the Latin to you. I explain all the.
Oh yes, it's very detailed. I recommend anybody who wants to read it. You can even read what you're writing along with it. It definitely It enhances it. I fortunately actually took Latin in high school, so I was holding up, but it was really helpful because you dissect things so well and really put things shine a different light, which is nice because it makes you think.
Yeah, I can't remember the exact name of the port. It's called Maine or something like that. But the 2 guys are discussing port, and then White interjects, well, actually they were drinking this form of mead. And then the 2 of them obviously have heard White say that. So it's just a funny little moment.
It is very comical.
Where the author is in the story but not in the story. So I obviously didn't catch everything, when I was 13 years old, 12, 13. But what I loved about it was when you get to the point where he pulls the sword out of the stone, especially in the 39 edition, the Putman edition, it becomes an explanation about how to be a weightlifter. All power comes from the nape of the neck. All power comes from there. Where are your forearms, said the badger. Where's your grip? Mm-hmm. Never let go, which is my signature statement, as you saw in my emails. Never let go is the first law of the raptor family. Never let go, which is, of course, my personal mission statement. Our family mission statement is make a difference. Our family motto is not where you start, it's where you finish. I think those are very important. If you get a chance, I know it sounds weird, listener, but if you can find a 3 or 4 word thing that rings true to you in every place of your life, write it down, put it on everything you do. For us to make a difference, we make a decision. Will it make a difference? I'm about to embark on a very long trip, and it came right down to it's in a 16-day period. I have 2 travel days, but that's the only time I'm not lecturing 8 hours a day.
Right.
And I just said, I don't know if I can do it. And Tiff, of course, said to me, well, will it make a difference? And it's like, yeah, it will. So here we go. So never let go. He's told to fold. The snake tells him, at one time you could, make 100 ribs work at once. Can't you connect it? And it's really just this little scene. It's the stone. A stone from the wall yells, cohere, hold together, which is cohere. What a great word that is. And so I finished the book, and I just thought, well, that was marvelous. And what it started me on was, instead of just, when you're in the great books tradition as a child, which are phenomenal. I mean, I was just telling Pat Flynn the other day that one of our assignments, as when I was probably 5th or 6th grade, we had to read Swiss Family Robinson and Robinson Crusoe back to back. Mm-hmm. But the assignment, and it wasn't written, because that's not the way, I mean, you can do writing too, but was to defend who are there's going to be 5 people on the deserted island, you and 4 others. And it's funny, some people said, well, I want my mom and dad and brother. And even back then, I'm like, well, I want a carpenter, I want a farmer, I want, emergency medical technician. Of course, now it'd be like, hot chicks, I guess.
Yes, survival mode.
and then the other one was, what are the 10 tools you'd bring? And it's funny because that kind of thinking is still where I'm at today in my life. I'm still a person who will say to you, what are your 10 favorite movies? What are your 10 favorite books? That's one of the things I expect of all my athletes to do for me. Mm-hmm. Because I want to know, I want you to go through the process of discernment to come up with them. And so what happened then with the great books tradition, my background, I read this book for the first time, a leisurely book, yet my brain was cranking through it, through the classic of, what are the things you pulled out of it? And it's funny because that book became, if you ever had a chance to be one of my students would recognize many of the methods that Merlin uses. The most important lesson, I have a master's in religious education, so I'm stronger there. But in pedagogy, we always say that common sense is probably the best truth there is. It really is true. Because as good as science can be, sometimes common sense works even better than, deductive, inductive, adductive reasoning. And then right underneath it is experience. Mm-hmm. As long as your experience isn't, if you saw the Loch Ness Monster, that's great. And you put your hand over your heart and you say you did it. That's great. But I'm still allowed to, not trust your experience a little bit. Now, my own experiences, when you read Sword in the Stone, the way Merlin teaches is he transfigures, right, or he gives Arthur
you an experience,
an adventure, like the very, 3+ chapters with Robin Wood and the attack on the good people. The good people are the anthropologia, depending which. Well, it's an adventure, and there's lessons to be learned. One of the things Arthur learns, sadly, in the lesson, he meets Maid Marian, and his first thought is, she would be a perfect woman to marry.
Yes.
And if you continue reading the books, you can see that his insight there would have probably helped him later. So I'm not ripping on Guinevere at all.
Right. But what's interesting is also I in reference to that, you've just given me so much to think about. My mind's like exploding, but luckily this is recorded and I can go back and take the notes on this later because you're always so insightful. But for the Maid Marian, what was interesting was he was like, oh, I didn't want to be on her team, and then he goes, wow, wait, she was like a soldier and she was no joke. She was kind of like a big deal. So I found it really fascinating that, it's that, on first glance thing, that's just like, every sentence, like you said, has a lesson in it or some sort of experiential symbolism or something. But I thought it was funny because he's like, I don't want to be on the girls' team because he got put with her group, right? And so,
then once again, White has that hilarious little line where he says, Marion could also hoot like an owl, whistle like this. But that's not important right now. It's like, you have to read it like 6 times to go, oh, that's funny. Okay.
Yeah, but you're right. It's very funny.
So let's go back to my family motto. It's not where you start, it's where you finish.
Yeah.
So in our family, we're strong believers. Don't judge a book by its cover and all that. We have discovered, my wife and I and my kids, over and over, in my coaching, there's a phrase, and it's a bit sexist, and I apologize. Looks like Tarzan, plays like Jane. Somebody will show up at a cert and they'll look like Mr. Universe, and they can't do the snatch test.
Right.
I'll go to a Highland game and some guy will show up with his tank top, and I don't know why the men do this, but they roll this thing here. They go like this to it to make it into a little thread. Looks like something from Victoria's Secret, but and they'll look great, but they can't turn the caber, they can't throw the 56, they can't. So that's just a. And when you say that, if you go back through the story with the lens of it's not where you start, it's where you finish. If you go through it with the lens of first impressions, you come away with a radically different view of the whole stories. When you meet King Pellinor, now he's going to go through a radical. He comes off as and they make fun of it in the movie a little
Yes.
bit.
Yeah.
But his his duty is to chase the questing beast. And later in the story, after it's the boar hunt at Christmas, they rediscover it, and Pellinor is a very strong, angry character. He's a very powerful character in that scene, but you don't notice it. You could even say, if you slide over to Harry Potter, Dumbledore comes off as in the first book, as a bit of a loon, and yet he is by far the most powerful, most dangerous wizard in the world, and Harry only appreciates it over time. And of course, Dumbledore is based on Merlin.
Right.
J.K. Rowling said that.
And Merlin is even like that. He's quirky, he's going backwards in time, and you wonder, like, not just T.H. White, but like, if you're putting yourself in the character itself, it's like, yeah, well, I'm testing you. Like, I'm acting like this on purpose. I'm not just loony. I mean, he's a little loony, but it's kind of like they have so many layers to them. It's like they don't really care what impression they're putting off. Like, listen to what I'm saying, not what you're seeing, kind of thing. Like, really absorb what's happening versus.
So, since you understand that backwards in time thing, you should be able to understand why I consider the saddest line in all history to be so soon. When he first meets for tea,
yes,
and he asks Wart, "How long have you been here?" He goes, "Half an hour," and he says, "So soon."
Yeah.
Because if you read the Book of Merlin, they stay together literally forever.
Yeah.
And he only has 30 minutes left with his best friend of all time.
Yeah.
It is tragic.
It's a tragic. Yes. And I read your Wandering Waits, like your thing on that. And that was something, because I just did an audiobook, right? And so that was something that I did. I had to like rewind, and I wanted to hear it again. And it was really sad, because I'm one of those, I'm not going to lie, a little bit of those anxiety people. And I'm always thinking about like, oh, my time is so short. I'm enjoying life so much because I have this like undying, like I'm so grateful because I'm so fortunate. My life is amazing. But then on the flip side, because I'm so grateful, I'm like, oh no, it's going to change. It's going to end. Everything's going to, so that really did make an impression on me. And of course, reading your blog post made it even more, brought more depth to it because you just kind of sigh, like there's that stillness. And I do want to go back to your 13-year-old self, because I find it fascinating that obviously the life is the quest, right? And so it's not about pulling the sword out of the stone, but it's the quest getting there. Because if you look at the book, the whole book are the quests, it's the adventures, it's the lessons. And like pulling the stone feels like it's like 30 seconds in time in reference to the 10 hours of listening, or like 20 pages of the book versus the hundreds of pages, right? So it's not really about just that goal, that end goal. It's like everything getting to that goal and what you do and all the journey that matters, right? And so for me, I find it fascinating because I feel like everything you do is with intention. My husband's heard you speak, and then comes home and basically has reiterated to me so many of the things that you've shared and the knowledge you have. And it's kind of interesting, though. You said at 13 you listened to or read this book and you were already dissecting it. I find it fascinating that you were so evolved at 13, and because now, of course, you have all this information. You're a scholar and a historian, but I have you always kind of just had that inclination, or was it in your upbringing or your schooling, like for you to read a book and go, oh, that was cool, there was like a wizard and he did magic? Like that's probably what most 13-year-olds thought when they read the book. But you then already started taking lessons from it, and I find that really fascinating.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, and I'd have to actually think about that for you. You're asking, I mean, is it the way I'm coded, or is it my environment? I mean, that's one of the great questions of all time. As a coach, I believe that your genetics and your geography are the two most important things that will bring you to your goal set, and then our little assist along the way. But yeah, what made me think that way? Yeah, you could certainly say the Great Books program. The fact that I was one of the last people trained in a classic curriculum. I mean, it all became guitar playing and kumbaya, and there's nothing wrong with that stuff. So there's nothing wrong with it. It's just that you really have to have a toolkit to appreciate some of the other stuff. I mean, if you don't have some foundation, I feel like I can really have almost any experience, because I have a foundation to bounce things off. I can tell you where, I can see where that comes from and stuff. But yeah, why was I breaking that down as a 13-year-old? I don't know. There was another book that I read at the same time called My Side of the Mountain. It's about a little boy who runs away and lives in the mountains. And that was the first book I ever read cover to cover in a single day. And what I liked about that book, too, is I felt in that book it was an obvious how-to book. So this is how you cook eggs in leaves. This is how you steal from raccoons. This is how you... And I'm wondering if maybe I read The Sword and the Stone a little bit too much like a how-to book. I don't know if that's an error or not.
No, but does that... I mean, at 13, it's hard to say because, our memories change over time too. But
Sure.
just like I asked my film experts, I know a lot of film critics. I used to work in the industry, and I'm like, can you not enjoy films anymore? Because all you see is, this writing or this was error or whatever. So because your mind works that way, does it take out a little bit of the I just want to be entertained factor, or do you just do you have the ability to have both? I mean, I guess not just as a child, but even now.
Well, I'm a big believer in the art of rereading. So it's a rare good book that I don't read several times. In fact, it's rare that at my desk I'm not. This is just the one desk, but I have a book. This book here, I got that book there, I got that book. I've got a pile of books here within reaching distance. I got Staying Supple by Jerome, which I've read 100 times. So for me, I believe more in the art of rereading. Now, I imagine good film critics would tell you that, I remember it was a beautiful moment when Siskel and Ebert were talking about the top 10 films. I think it was the 70s, because I used to watch them on PBS when I was in college. I had a college professor, Carol O'Connor. She was so good to me. When my father died, when I was getting my master's, she went out of her way to tell every faculty member what had happened to me, because there was and explain, I'm sorry, not do that one. When my mother died, when I was getting my master's degree, she went out of her way to explain to every faculty member what had happened to me and the kind of the difficult, even though I am a discus thrower and I look big, I just got punched in the gut. So she and I would always talk on Monday in our class about Siskel and Ebert's, the 2 thumbs up thing. Mm-hmm. And Ebert picked Apocalypse Now as the #1 film of the 70s. I think I got this right. And Ebert said, I thought that movie was bloated and trashy. And Siskel said a very simple thing. He goes, well, as they go deeper and deeper into the jungle, humanity falls off more and more. And Siskel went, I've got to watch that film again. And I thought that was a beautiful moment.
Right.
Because, I would say Siskel and Ebert, and I don't think I would be out. For film critics, you could put them in the pantheon of the top, wouldn't you?
Yes, of course. I mean, it's the 2 thumbs up.
I mean, the fact that I say 2 thumbs up.
Yeah, and everybody knows what that means, yeah.
And one of the things, so here I am, I'm a 22-year-old master's student getting my first grad degree, and I was deeply influenced by that one moment, because the humility to go back and reread a book. Like I've told other teachers that if they're looking for textbooks for a class, The Count of Monte Cristo and The Sword and the Stone are brilliant for an education class, because The Count of Monte Cristo has this, in the unabridged, this massive section where he goes from being kind of an idiot to someone who can hang around any court in Europe and people think he's royalty, because he learns. He learns 4, 5, 6 languages. He learns how to act. And I think, another one would be a good example would be Dune. I've read Dune many times. The Godfather, which I think is a classic. The Godfather is much richer than the movie, but still, the movie was
well done. Yes, movies. Yeah. Well done.
You can't argue with that. But the book is one of those books that, I would even call it. I think There's a few books this last century from the 20th century that will carry on. I think The Road, I don't remember who wrote it, but it's such a downer of a book, but it's amazing. And I think The Godfather, and I kind of think T.H. White might survive in the future for a long time.
I do
It'll
think
be,
so.
yeah, it'll be interesting. I always love to contemplate that. What's going to be the inferno of our modern reader? Where you must, to understand the 20th century, you must read this. I'd love to say that To Kill a Mockingbird, but when I was young, everyone thought it would be Gatsby or some of the others.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but it's it. Yeah.
I think that I could be wrong. It's either C.S. Lewis or someone writing about C.S. Lewis said that in terms of the reread, because I know you've always expressed it. A lot of the people that I listen to in terms of thinking that they're very scholarly, very knowledgeable, and I'm always trying to learn more, have always said it's the importance of, reading books many times over versus, reading many books. But there's also something to be said for certain periods in your life. So The Sword in the Stone has obviously been something on a journey with you since you were a child. And I think like the Narnia classics are another one that they said, well, you should read that as a child, read it as a young adult or as a, whatever, or, so.
Yeah, I don't know if they carry over. Yeah.
Well, but that's, I think that was said, like C.S. Lewis said or something, but I think that concept is there where, maybe The Sword in the Stone for you obviously worked out where you've obviously reread it many times at different stages in your life. Did you gather different things from it because of your age? Because now I'm thinking, wow, Dan John at 13 was very very mature, and you're already dissecting. But I mean, each time you read it, was there, because there was a pivotal point in your life, like you mentioned, seeing the movie, for example, to even now, like?
Well, now I'm a grandfather. Here I'm reading a book. I'm talking about a book I read as I never even kissed a girl. When I first read the book, and now I'm a grandfather. I mean, so I started out as Wart, now I'm Merlin, in a sense. And I think that's the importance of rereading. When you read, for example, gospel stories, especially parables, one of the things I always try to do is get people to realize that every character is important in the story, even the people who don't say anything. Like in if I don't want to get all religious or anything, but when you get to the crucifixion scene, the crowd is a very important character, and in many times, Le Bon wrote that great book called The Mob after the French Revolution. Many of us at times are the mob. We're the crowd. We're the one egging people on. Simon Garfunkel's song "Save the Life of My Child" comes because of a man on a balcony was egged on to jump by the crowd. And he did, and he died. Well, how often are we the crowd? How often are we the mob? And so when I go through a story, I hate to say it, but many times in my life, I've been much more Sir Kay than Wart. I've been the bully and the, someone who's gotten things undeserved, and you got to remind yourself of that. My good friend Socrates, I went to high school with. He went, the unexamined life is not worth living. It's so. One of the things I think rereading allow you to do is also examine, why did I miss this the first 300 times I've read the book? Well, I didn't miss it. I just wasn't ready to hear it yet. When you're trying to, there's a story, Genesis 22, where you're trying to teach these high school kids, and it's just brutal. David Denby has the same insight in the book, Great Books, when it comes to, he's reading King Lear as an adult with his mother going into dementia. Well, when you read King Lear as a 19-year-old college student, but when you read it as a 48-year-old with your parents becoming, so when you read Abraham sacrificing Isaac, when I read that story now as a father, I can't bring myself to look at it. But when you read it as a high school kid, it's like, next page. I'll sit around with high school kids and they'll talk about love. And it's funny because here in Utah we have I have this feeling in my heart. Well, that's great. But love is when I've had 2 kids and grandkids. When you're cleaning up a bathtub full of feces for the 4th time in a week because your baby decides to poop in the bathtub and you're reaching in and cleaning that stuff out, folks, that's love. That's love.
That's very visual.
It's not. Cleaning feces out of a hot tub is love, man. It's not putting a picture on the wall and going, oh,
No forget-me-nots. That's not love.
Yeah, it's all.
So going back to Merlin, because I just can't get enough of it, and I was so excited that you wanted to have this conversation. You talked about the saddest line, and one of your favorites was the "so soon," and I wanted to share with you a couple of mine, and I wanted you to kind of,
Sure.
wandering wait me there. Give me what your thoughts were. And it's funny because I'm learning to be a good reader. I am not a good reader, and I'm trying to be better. And so it's funny, my husband, I consider him a good reader. He rereads books and is able to talk about them and quote them and say, oh, so-and-so, because he reads like you, and then what you write down, he reads what you're writing about the book. And so it's like just going deep, deep, deep versus I've read 100 books this week, kind of thing. And what struck me was I listened to the book recently, A Sword in the Stone, and I was loving it, but I was in the entertainment mode. So, because I was thinking about the movie when I saw, I was visualizing all the characters
Sure.
that I remember watching from the cartoon.
Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, I will reread it though with a different intention, especially after this conversation. But then I got to a certain point, and I was like, "Whoa, I need to pause this, and I need to write it down." And it wasn't just because I had this interview; it was just like, I don't know, it just jumped out at me. And I'm imagining like every single line is like that for you when you're reading it. But I have a few favorites, but one was this whole paragraph where he says, Wart, he's so sweet. Like, I just want to hug him almost in every scene. But he says, I should pray to God to let me encounter all the evil in the world in my own person, so that if I conquered, there would be none left. And if I were defeated, they would be the one to suffer for it. And then Merlin says, you would be conquered and suffer for it. And he goes, I wouldn't mind. And Merlin goes, wouldn't you? Just wait. And I just thought that was so it was so endearing because he's this like innocent,
Go on just a little farther if you have it in front of you.
I don't know. Is it then? I had written it out, but does he say then? Why do people not think when they're grown up as I do when I'm young? Is that the part, or did I skip?
Well,
I may have skipped.
Well, what if people don't want? Merlin goes, what if people don't want you to do this?
Yes.
Well, I could ask. Wart says, well, I could ask.
Yes. And so it becomes and then it becomes comical, so it's like they're teasing you with this lesson, but then they switch it to comedy. And sometimes as a reader, you may forget that there was this moment because then it's funny and then you go on and on. So if you don't reread, you miss that. But I want to hear your thoughts on that passage.
Well, I think when I talk about that line in Wandering Waits, I think I pull out the Impossible Dream from Man of La
Mancha. Yeah.
And you're willing to you're willing to march into hell for a heavenly cause. And I know and then if you can do this, then on your deathbed you'll be happy. And Wart is kind of reflecting what Don Quixote is saying in The Impossible Dream. This vision I have, I am willing to die for. And Merlin's like, but see, here's the thing, Merlin is me. In my first published work, if you don't mind, I'm going to geek out on you for a minute.
Oh, no, I love geeking out. I'm totally geeking out.
in my first published work, I wrote about Beowulf. And I broke down the speeches of Beowulf, which I look back on it now and I'm like, that's pretty good. Maybe I should have gone for the glitz and glamour of being a Beowulf scholar, because there's where the money is, right? But what I discovered is that warriors, every time they give a speech, ignore the past and ignore the future. It's all right now. When they ask Beowulf, tell us your exploits, those are in the past. What are you going to do about this guy? about Grendel's mother. I don't know. Show up and fight. Let's have some drinks. If you're a warrior, you know, you live in the pure present, and that's one of the things I've really expanded in my life. I think one of the gifts children have is they live in the pure present. The dying tend to live in the pure present, and it's kind of nice. From what I've seen, most artists, because of the nature of capitalism, live. We were just talking about Will Ferrell the other day, and about how we might be in a situation in just a year or two when young people go, Will Ferrell, he's no comedian, he's not funny, because we're basing him on his body of work recently has not been great. I mean, he's got some phenomenal stuff. Tom Hanks, we base him, though his obviously his whole career has been just amazing.
Yeah.
but with artists and dancers, you base them on their last work.
Right.
Whether they're good or bad, and you forget to see the body of work. So warriors and athletes tend to live in the pure present. Coaches, I have to live in the big picture, the past, the present, and the future. So if I'm working with you, when I listen to you talk about your goal set, I'm going to reference up people who have been on a similar path. And then I'm going to bring you today. And then I'm going to step back and talk about the big picture. We can do this. We can make you the best shot putter in the world. But, you're going to really have to put on some size. No offense, you're not big enough. And you're going to really have to do a lot of stuff that downstream you're going to pay a high price for. You're going to be doing a lot of heavy lifting, a lot of time. You're going to spend a ton of time in the sun getting sunburned. And you're going to give up a lot of stuff. Okay, let's do that. That was a king talking. Kings talk in Beowulf. I knew your father, I knew your grandfather, I knew your uncle. We're so pleased to have you here. What brings us here is this terrible burden we're facing. But together, if we fight together, our children's children will be safe. Past, present, future. So when I look at Ward and Merlin in that particular scene, Ward is a warrior. I don't care. As long as I fight for the right, without question or pause, to be willing to march into hell for a heavenly cause. He's a warrior. And sadly, Merlin at that moment is a king. Many people have died fighting for heavenly causes, and they never get to stroke their child's head. I grew up with people who had lost their parents in World War II. And in some cases, people older than me, not much though. They lost their dad in World War II. And so the dad went off, and it was an important cause. The Nazis were horrible, and there's no question about that. And so were all the fascists. And it's good to see them coming back, isn't it?
Oh, don't get me started, because this will be a 2 hours of my ranting. So go on.
But at the same time, you fought for a heavenly cause.
Right.
And the problem, but your future's okay because you had a child. And I always feel, Pythagoras, everyone knows who Pythagoras is. Remember A squared plus B squared equals C squared?
I'm trying not to, but yes.
Yeah.
It was a painful time.
What most people don't realize is that he was a philosopher. Mm-hmm. And he said to achieve immortality, you should have a child, write a book, plant a tree, and build a house. I think that's beautiful. And by the way, his son-in-law was Milo, who picked up the calf and every day. And so Milo and Pythagoras are the parents of progressive resistance exercise, which is what I do for a living. So in the scene you pulled out, it's one of those moments where, I didn't really have a chance to get to know my parents as adults, so they died when I was young. It's funny when I say young now, but they died when I, was I 22 when my mom died? Yeah, 22. And so I never really had a chance. They never had a chance. I never had a chance for us to. They only knew me as a warrior. They only knew me as the guy who would throw the discus for 6 hours.
Mm-hmm.
The guy willing to if smashing your face against the wall makes the discus go farther, bring that wall, And so I wish I would have had those times with my folks, but I didn't. So when I see that particular scene, oddly, the one you brought up reminds me of my mother warning me about things in life. And so it's weird, the scene you picked up reminds me of my mom sometimes cautioning me about these things I wanted to do, It's interesting to have a memory that's 40 plus years ago in my life, but sitting with my mom at dinner, kind of cautioning me about this goal set I had. Mm-hmm. Because it was going to cost me. And it's true. I'm almost 62, and she was right. I missed on a lot of life by doing it. Having said that, I've certainly caught up for it in the last 10 years. So. Give me another quote.
Okay, another one I liked, and because I'm a kung fu teacher, and so it spoke to me from a teaching perspective, because it's something that I'm always like, come on, students, like, get the concept, because for me as a traditional martial artist, we're all about basics and fundamentals, and everybody comes to literally, we have a temple, like it's a Chinese temple. My father's super traditional, so we have this amazing thing. And, they come in and they've just seen the last movie where people are flying, and that's what they want to do, or they want swords right away, And so we're like, yeah, no, you're going to be in a stance for a little while, for months, it takes time. And so, and people get frustrated. And so the next line I have is from Merlin, and I only have the one quote, but, I'm a little bit obsessed with Merlin. So, right. And he said, the best thing for being sad is to learn something. That is the only thing that never fails.
And then he goes on, if you continue on the line, is it could take a lifetime to learn biology. It could take 3 to learn this field. And then when you finally figure out all that stuff, learn how to make a wheel. It's just a beautiful line. It is, my life has not all been just fairy dust and unicorns. I've had The Dark Night of the Soul, 1985 for sure, and a few other times. But what has always pulled me out of my life's punched me in the face a number of times, and that's fine. I'm not whining at all. But one of the things that's always pulled me out is 2 things, actually. One is, okay, this is a series of events that have knocked you down. I got divorced. I went to the Middle East. I picked up a liver parasite. I lost 40 pounds in 2 weeks. I came back broke. I lived in a basement apartment with a fold-out bed. So what did I do? I bought the Great Books collection, all 51 books. And I put myself on the 15-minute-a-day reading program. And I revisited a lot of the books I read as a child. And, of course, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, Dante, you just keep going on, Shakespeare, everybody. And at the same time, the other lesson I learned is you take out a piece of paper and a pen, and you write down, here's the issue. Just write it down. I call it in my next book, which is funny, I'm already writing, my new book has just came out, but my next book is already well away. I talk about being pecked to death by ducks. It's a phrase my wife used about being a parent, is you're constantly being pecked to death by ducks. And one of the things I tell people to do often is you got to write down your ducks. Now, if what's driving you crazy is your daughters, Kelly and Lindsay, those are my daughters, write it down. And then the second sometimes you put it on, it's funny, you put it on that piece of paper. You put it on the piece of paper, and there's like this magic thing happens, like it's like that Harry Potter diary in the second edition, You write it down, and all of a sudden the ink gets absorbed and all gets blown away. Just writing down what your ducks are, just writing down what you're being pecked to death by, sometimes alleviates just the act of doing that. And then part 2, and this would come from Earl Nightingale, and this is a big fan of what Earl used to say, is then write down any solution that comes to mind, no matter how stupid it is. And he had this idea: make 100 solutions. Well, there's not maybe 100. So we just write it, get sillier and sillier and sillier. And I would say 100 would probably be overkill, but 25. You're in. Okay, here's a good one. I just did this experience with a friend of mine. Some serious debt. So I wrote down. I said, I want you to write down 20 things that you can do to deal with debt. Here's the funny thing: is number 19, 20. Number 19 was maybe not buy a new car every 2 years. Okay. And number 20 was quit using my credit cards when I'm sad. Because 19 and 20 were more important than 1 through 18.
Of course. It sounds so. I can only imagine.
So the beauty of that thing is, hey, folks, bad stuff, life is going to punch you in the mouth hard. It is. Life, every poet, every saint, every sinner, every scholar has said somewhere that, life is tough. But at least learn something. My brother Gary, I got 3 brothers who went to Vietnam in the war. I have to be careful in this day and age.
Right. They're like, they went to Ha Long Bay on vacation.
Yeah, exactly. So, and 2 of my brothers are disabled and from the war. And my brother Gary said something to me when I was about, it wasn't long after, it would have been 71, 72. And he said, the worst part of Vietnam for me is that no one's written anything good about it. I'm what? So by this time I was 14, 15. I had 3 brothers in Vietnam. No wonder I'm a little different than most people. I can't even put my arms around that as a 62-year-old, 61 3/4. And then these movies came out about Vietnam. Those Rambo movies, which are just...
I don't know if they were really about Vietnam, though, because it just used the backdrop, right? Like, I don't know, Casualties of War? No, maybe that one wasn't. Was that one?
Apocalypse Now.
Yeah, of course, that's the...
But still, I think finally the best thing was Ken Burns' documentary.
Oh, well, Ken Burns is
a
master.
Well, and what he did on that, you only need to watch the first 2. After the first 2, you can just turn the television off and then go find a quiet place and weep. Because after the first 2, you discover this thing that, oh my gosh, the South was horrible. But okay, my point on all this, folks. I'm not doing poli-sci history. My point is, when I watch that series on a series of flights, I fly 250,000 miles a year, so I watch a lot of shows on planes. It was the first time since 1971 or 72, when Gary said that to me, that I was able to understand what Merlin said. I finally learned something. We were wrong. We might have been on the wrong side. And that's the key. That's what Merlin's trying to tell you. No matter what the disaster is, sit back and learn something. My knock on America in 2019, it's obvious I know you people in the Midwest don't believe in climate change, but by God.
They could come to Florida right now.
You're getting hit by only a 500-year flood has happened twice. Tornadoes are hitting before tornado season. When we rebuild the banks, the docks, the dikes after these floods, don't put them at the same height. Learn something. When we decide to have my daughters, basically their entire life, we have been at war. My wife was in New York. She saw the second plane go in at the towers. So my daughter's whole life, we've been at war. Friends. So, I've got a little area over there where I've got mementos to friends of mine who've died in this thing. And the thing is, I'd like to say, what have we learned? What have we learned? What have we learned by the sacrifices of all those fine people, both due to the terrorists and due to the war? What have we learned? And I hate to be so negative here, but this is what my job is now as a grandfather and Merlin, is to say, for God's sakes, at least learn something.
It is very frustrating, I feel, because I also have the joy of working with high schoolers and 20-somethings and whatnot, and a lot of them will complain about their history class, for example, and you as a history teacher and a scholar of history, it is very frustrating that we can't just take a look back, not even that long ago, and like you said, learn something. And it's I wonder if there's something to be said for, there's constantly all these amazing books that come out every year. A lot of them are your books that come out, and things on coaching, and but then you're talking about the Great Books program, and I'm wondering if maybe there's something to be said for going back to something that's not so in your face, like here's what you do to be a good coach, here's why you need to be, like, maybe they would get more out of something like The Sword and the Stone, because there's that entertainment, but then you actually have to think about it for yourself and read between the lines and actually have a different way of thinking versus getting the instructional. I think the instructional is amazing. I need that. I like direct. I'm a very direct person, but reading this at the age I am now and just listening to it, a lot of that was going through my head, because as a teacher, like when they were drinking the port, and he goes, well, another way is to advertise to find a tutor, and they're like, and then he goes, well, we could go on a quest, and in that you just have this, oh, it's on now, the quest, now there's going to be a quest, and it's like you can feel where that's going, but then as a teacher, you're going, well, now they'll be learning, and now there's going to be experiences, and here's what we're going to do. And I think maybe there's something to be said about, one, respecting history and learning from it, but two, maybe we need to go back to the classics.
Yes. But let's put a caveat in here. The hardest teams to work with are the ones that just won the state championship. And the reason is because now the easiest team to work with is the one who lost with 1.2 seconds left to go in the game, or the athlete who threw the discus out of bounds. If you read my new book, 40 Years with a Whistle, I talk very candidly about some failures in my life. I don't talk enough about as many as I should. But boy, failure is what most people need to succeed. I was talking about fat loss with a person the other day. Talking to a person about fat loss, saying, if you do this diet for 6 months, you'll lose 4 pounds, which is just such you don't even notice it. But this vision of all this wonder down the line doesn't really work very well. But let me make my next one. What helps most people, sadly, is pain. And, I was telling Pat the other day that I'm going to give you $10,000 in cash, okay? And you're going to put the cash in your bank account and draw a check. If I don't lose 10 pounds in a week, I hate BYU football especially, okay? I hate BYU football. You will send a check in my name to BYU football if I don't lose 10 pounds in a week. Now, what's funny is that negative motivation seems to help people more than positive. Anthony Robbins has that wonderful, it's a quadrant. In fact, make sure I'm right. Sorry, I'm writing a new book, and every time I get a good idea, I'll make sure.
Absolutely. No, I'm happy to be witnessing the process.
And then my quadrants. Okay. So one of the things he does is you put do, don't. So get the goal, don't get the goal. And then pain and pleasure into a quadrant. Make sense? So I often ask people, okay, what pleasure will you get if you get the goal? And by gosh, it's kind of vague. It's like, well, if I make the Olympic team, then I'll have that USA gear and it'll be so cool. Okay, what if you don't get the goal? and I'm quoting a friend of mine. I might swear a little bit, so just hang in there. He goes,
It's all good.
then that bitch ex-girlfriend of mine will be right. I hate her. She's sarcastic. The emotion he carried for not getting the goal was so much more palatable, tasty. All the senses came alive when he talked about his ex-girlfriend not believing his goals. And then I say, well, what pleasure will you get if you don't get your goal? And everyone goes, what do you mean if I pleasure if I don't get my goal? I go, well, like this one woman I worked with, how many diets have you tried? And she's the one that told me she had tried 30. I go, okay, you failed at 31, at 30. I'm Mr. 31 here. What did you get from failing on all those other diets? Well, and it's very uncomfortable moments. Like, well, when I was on Atkins, man, I love donuts. Oh, so the pleasure of not doing Atkins is donuts. Yeah. And all of a sudden, these things just start to unpack out of the mind. And here's another one. What pain will you get if you make your goal? People, they'll go, what do you mean there'll be pain if I get my goal? Well, I got to tell you something, my goal in the 9th grade was to throw the discus for Utah State University. I threw the discus for Utah State University. Well, was there pain? Well, yeah, I never partied. I never really dated. Spent a lot of time, a lot of hours alone on a field throwing by myself. I had to put up with, trying to buy clothes at 7.9% body fat with 34-inch thighs in the 70s was, so I used to wear overalls all the time because it's the only pants that could fit my thighs. People touch your traps when your traps are up here. You're a freak. No one wants to. None of your partying friends want to hang around with you because you had to go from South San Francisco to Logan, Utah, which is not exactly a mecca of nightlife. See, I can go on for about 20 minutes about all the pain of my goals, but I can all. Yeah. So here's the thing I try to do when I'm working with people is I want you to fill in that chart, pain, pleasure, if you do it or don't, the quadrant. So it sits like this. And the harder you work on that chart, the more and more, I've had people tell me, okay, you talked me out of it. And I'll say, I didn't talk you out of it. I just showed you what was going to happen in 3 days. So there's an important phrase in the Old Testament. Prophets are not fortune tellers. They don't divine the future. Prophets are forth tellers. If you continue to shoot heroin into your veins twice a day, in 10 years, you will have an addiction you'll never be able to get over. Would you agree that's true? Well, okay. If you continue to have unprotected, if you're a 19-year-old girl and you continue to have daily unprotected sex for a year, statistically, you will get pregnant. I'm not a fortune teller.
Right.
I'm a forth teller. If you continue on these behaviors, okay, you put on 40 pounds your first year in college due to beer and pizza. You sit around all day smoking pot with your friends. If you continue on this path, you're not going to graduate in 4 years as an all-American discus thrower and academic superstar. I'm not being a jerk. I'm forth. God, isn't that a great way to say things?
It is. And I'm always kind of looking for better ways because my husband always says to me, well, you can sit very comfortably. You'll get in your couch, pull up the blanket, and you're really comfortable in the uncomfortable moments. And he says that's some sort of gift because he says he does not like having uncomfortable conversations. And as a coach, you have to, right? And so when you said all that, it resonated because you obviously are not just capable, but very seasoned at it and also find a way to kind of get through without being a jerk, but also being really real, And for me, I find it interesting. We could talk about coaching for a second, since, that's what you do and all. But like those uncomfortable moments, I think, is what differentiates, like that honesty with a student or a client or a friend or somebody that's really seeking your professional advice in terms of health and fitness and whatnot. And it's like, on one hand, there's like brutal honesty, and then there's, the fluffy, well, just keep at it, you're gonna get there. And talk a little bit about how you were you always able to stay in the uncomfortable and just be able to kind of give people that realism, or is it a learned trait?
It's a path. No, it is very difficult. There's a show on Netflix. It's a documentary called Last Chance University, and I honestly, it's unwatchable most of the time for me. But in the third season, the first 2 years are East Mississippi. This third season was Indianapolis Community College, or Independence Community College. I'm sorry. And in the very last episode, the coach talks about his assistant coach. He goes, "This is tough. When I was young, I was the same way. I thought I could save everybody. So a guy would do something bad, and I'd hide it from the head coach." And he goes, "It doesn't work. You can't save everybody." But what was important, he said there, when he was a young coach, when I was young, I thought I could motivate everybody into fat loss, Olympic lifting, elite performance, high academic standards. And I have had so many people, and here's the thing, this is a key, they're not lying to me. People tell you what they think you want to hear. Sorry, folks, I'm writing a book.
That's all good. And don't worry, this is recorded, so you'll be able to.
You think you want to hear. It is a truism of my life. People tell you what they think you want to hear. So when you say, "How are you?" Go ahead, come on.
How are you?
Well, a couple years ago I had cancer. I'm recovering from a hip replacement. And even though I'm making great progress, I'm not nearly where I should be. I'm in pain still, which is crazy. It's 5 months later. But it's only when I do certain things. I'm really concerned about one of my daughters, and I'm very concerned about my grandson. How is that?
Open.
Ask me again.
How are you?
Hey, I'm fine. How are you doing today? There you go. So when I say, let's see, how should we do this? You're Dan John. Ask me, what are your goals?
So what are your goals?
I want to get in shape and lose fat and be really good in a sport that I don't know yet. I just told you what I think you want to hear.
Right.
And ask me, what are your goals?
So what are your goals?
You see this guy? See this? The 62-year-old guy with metal hips and surgeries on every joint, and graying hair, and this isn't me. I'm a 21-year-old guy who's got a 4.0 at Utah State. I'm throwing the discus. This isn't me. Who's me is this guy who runs up flights. You follow that? Mm-hmm. Most people, when you do goal setting, what they're trying to tell you is, this isn't me. Now, I was trying to be very honest. That's why I was trying to be extremely honest with you in my examples, but because I'm okay with the fact that I'm the age I'm at, and I'm okay with that.
Right.
I'm very good at my own skin, and that's not easy. It takes a process. But most people, when you talk about goal setting, the goal is basically this: this isn't me. I want to be who I used to be, is usually what they're trying to tell you. But to get to that point, it takes a fair amount of work.
Yeah. Well, I know that we have to wrap this up. I have so many more questions, so we'll have to do this
Go.
again.
I'd be honored.
Yeah, well, we should absolutely do this
Ask
again.
one more, okay?
Okay, I'll give you one more, just because it's something I actually often ask on Culture Chat, because it's always a interesting answer from a various group of diverse people. And so I know in previous talks you've mentioned, when in doubt, go back to tradition, trust your tradition, and trust the tradition. These are notes from my husband, came back from one of your speeches. And I often ask my guests, like, what does tradition mean to you and how do you define it? And so I found it fascinating that you use that word kind of frequently, or at that time did. And so I was just curious what tradition means to you.
Well, I'd have to quote Tevye from Fiddler on the Roof. Why do we always do it this way? I don't know.
Well said.
So for me, tradition.
Yes, we're getting a musical and everything.
So for me, tradition is these things we do, and we don't even know why we do them, but actually I'm okay with it. There was a moment at my mom's funeral, which, where I picked up some dirt and threw it on her casket in her grave. And my brother Bill my cousin Bill walked over, and he said, I never realized how Irish you are. Well, 40 years ago. But the idea of that is, I did something that I didn't even know that was in me. And that's what tradition does. It protects you when you're lonely, alone, scared, frightened. You fall back on this toolkit of things that we call tradition. And there must be a good reason for it somewhere. To quote Tevye, I don't know. But when you fall back on your tradition, on those things that we kept with us through when they try to slaughter us here, they try to kill us there, when they try to starve us, when the famine hit, when the plague hit. These are the things that got us up in the morning and kept us going. That's what tradition is. And as a coach, you got to have something to fall back on. Because what's going to happen is you're going to be a room full of people one day all looking at you to say something intelligent. And your job then, generally, is to fall back on tradition. Generally, I say what my coach told me when we lost to this team. The sun will come up tomorrow morning, as it always does and it always will. If this is the worst thing that ever happened in your life, to happen to you in your life, you've had a pretty good life.
Thank you so much for sharing with me today, Dan. I really appreciate it, and I definitely would love to have you back on the show.
Anytime you want. Once a month would be great.
I'm going to hold you to that.
Because we barely touched on the sword and the stone. So.
I know. Well, I honestly was very intimidated coming into this interview because I was like, I'm not going to be able to hang. I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm not as scholarly, and I don't know Sword in the Stone that well, but this was a lot of fun and very enriching for me. So I don't know. I'm always like, sorry, listeners, this is all about me. So I got a lot out of it. And no, I know everybody else has as well. So thank you so much.
If I didn't bring you along with me, then I'm not a very good teacher. My job is to lead you, to help you. Yeah, so listen, let's do this again together sometime. And it's easy to get a hold of me. And 8:00 in the morning for me is no problem at all. Okay?
Wonderful. Thank you so very much.
Let's talk again soon.
That's all for today's episode. Thanks for listening to Culture Chat and hope you enjoyed the conversation. Please subscribe and rate my podcast. Feel free to leave me suggestions or send an email to mimi@culturechatpodcast.com or follow me on social media at Sifu Mimi Chan on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook.